everyone, and a warm welcome to the podcast today. I'm Alistair, an SGLN ambassador, and we are very happy to have you joining us. Well, today, of course, we have Piyush with us, and we are so happy to have him here with us to share his experiences. Hi, Piyush. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Alistair. It's a real pleasure to be here. Don't ask me very difficult questions.
Oh, no, don't worry. That's the whole point of what we are here today, actually. So it's so good to see you here, and we know that you have various experiences. We know that you are the chairman of a few different boards and organizations as well, with Mandai and with SMU. And just to share with you as well, I was actually from SMU. I graduated with a Bachelor's of Economics, and so happy to see you here today.
That's fantastic. You know what's common between Mandai and SMU?
Not
they
too
both,
sure.
They both deal with wildlife.
Oh,
Of two different kinds.
yes, two different kinds of wildlife. What kind of wildlife do you see in SMU?
Oh, I can tell you, all of you people who graduate from SMU are exuberant in spirit and very varied in their outlook, just like creatures in the zoo.
Of course, I think there's so much similarities as well in terms of the thirst for knowledge and the inclusivity that all of us have.
That's
and
true.
we don't stay at one place. We go to many different places, right?
Well said, well said.
Well, today the topic that we'll be covering is actually cross-cultural communication. And we know that in your various leadership experiences as well, you came from India, you had experience in Indonesia, you came to Singapore a couple of times previously as well. Do you mind sharing some of these experiences? How was your experience when you first came to Singapore?
Well, I came to Singapore first in 1991, and my overall abiding first takeaway was Singapore is really organized. And that's a huge cultural difference compared to India, where I came from, where everything's totally disorganized.
Oh, is it?
So nothing in India would ever work on time. In Singapore, everything always worked on time. So I used to finish my work in India at like 11 o'clock at night. And I came to Singapore, I had a much bigger job, and I used to be done by lunchtime. And I couldn't figure what was going on. And then I realized that a lot of what I thought was work in India was actually not work. It was just error correction. I was working very hard to make the elephant dance. But in Singapore, the elephant danced by itself. And so you didn't have to put in all those hard yards. And that meant that you needed to organize your work methods and what you prioritize very, very differently. If somebody told you something's going to be with you next morning, in India, you have to spend a long time following up, chasing, sending people around. In Singapore, they said it'll be there at 9 in the morning, it will be there at 8 o'clock. So that's a big shift in culture, which I had to reckon with very early in my new Singapore role then. Then after that, I got transferred to Indonesia. And Indonesia, I realized that, again, at a national level, that culture is again very, very different. They're much gentler and softer people. And there is a reluctance to deal with conflict. And therefore, even today, if you ask an Indonesian about anything, they hate saying no. So they will say not yet. They won't say tidak, they'll say belum. And even if you ask a 90-year-old guy, are you married? He'll never say no. He'll say not yet. I mean, like he's going to get married at 92 or something, but that's just the culture. So you got to realize that in Indonesia, you got to do things very differently. It's got to be gentle, and it's got to be very considerate of the fact that people don't like dealing with conflict. So I worked in Hong Kong after that. I worked in Malaysia, and you realize that these cultural nuances and cultural traits matter. How you relate to people, how you deal with people, they're important, and it reflects on the way you get work done.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. That's really a vast experience that you have all around the region. I'm just curious, how did you then learn the different cultural nuances when you were there in these regions?
You know, Alistair, well, you can learn a little bit from reading, and I sort of encourage everybody. So you should read a little bit. I do think a degree of immersion into how people think and operate is helpful. So for example, now when we bring expatriates into Singapore, we have something called a Singapore Immersion Program. And we spend a couple of days telling people what are the sensitivities, what you should watch out for, what is the history and the mindset of an average Singaporean, and why is it the way it is. We make people walk the trails. We'll go and take them off to different parts of the city and so on. I think all of that helps, but it's not enough. In the ultimate analysis, the best way to embrace and learn about a culture is to interact deeply with the people, and which means really having experience and exposure on the ground, and testing and seeing, how people respond to your various actions and reactions, and watching other people and seeing how they do it.
Wow, thanks so much for sharing. And when you choose to interact with them and being on the ground, how was the reaction like towards you? Because someone from another culture, another background, were they apprehensive? Were they accepting and welcoming?
So I have a personal theory that, well, all countries have a culture. You can tell a Malaysian from a Singaporean or Indonesian, generally speaking, because of their culture. But at the same time, within a country, you can create your own culture. And so I sometimes say, if you go in any country and look at a special company, you can see the company has its own culture. And in my early days of Citibank, I said Citibank had its own culture, and you could identify the culture everywhere. And that culture actually transferred very well from country to country. So most Citibankers behaved alike, and they had the same value system. They looked at the same things. My shorthand for this is a company culture can trump a country culture. So the first thing you got to pay a lot of attention to is what is the culture of the company. And if you can figure and create a unified culture, in fact, I believe in creating cultures. You can create a culture by design. But if you have a unified culture, then you have a common starting place. You have a common language. You have a common set of behaviors that are accepted in the company. And if that happens, then for individuals to go across countries becomes a lot easier because you're operating from a common premise. If you have no common premise, it's much harder. But in my case, every time I moved around within the company, and therefore I was advantaged. I was operating from a common base of language and a common understanding of the way you behaved inside the company. Now, after that, however, you still have to be conscious that things are different. And if you are mindful of that, then people are not apprehensive because, you make the effort. If you're not conscious of that and you wind up treading on people's toes, then obviously people react differently. And sometimes you only learn the hard way. So when I went to Indonesia the first time, it took me some time to realize that you cannot put the same degree of pressure on people as you can in Singapore or in India. Singapore, India were colonized by the English. It is accommodate on a different way of thinking. And so you can be very direct. And you can tell somebody, hey, this is not right. And also, people respond to incentives differently. And you tell people, work hard and you get promoted. I found in Indonesia that was not uniformly the case. Oftentimes, people would tell you, I don't want the promotion. I'd much rather have an easier pace of life. That carrot you're putting out in front of me is not that important to me. Or if you put too much pressure and you're very direct, they would react, and including everybody, not just in the work environment. My domestic staff, every time you push them very hard, they would tell you, Saya pushing. That means my head is spinning. I'm not going to. So I refuse to do anymore. So that you can only learn. But again, if you're thoughtful about it, people are not apprehensive. They don't react immediately. But you can see from their body language what is working and what is not working.
I like how you are attentive to the details, especially in terms of how people react, their body language. And you also mentioned about your belief that the company culture can supersede and triumph over the country culture. And we're going to ask you, in terms of communication, how do you communicate effectively such that you bring everyone together, diverse cultures from different parts of the world? How do you communicate in such a way that you bring everyone together to form the company culture?
There are a lot of different things you can do to form a company culture. The first sounds like motherhood, but it is about having a shared sense of purpose. The mission, vision thing. I'm a big believer in that. I spend a lot of time actually making sure that we all tied into a common assessment of what is the soul of the company. What are we all about? Why are we in this game? That's the mission. And the vision, which is what is our objective? What are we hoping to be in an ideal world? I spend time getting everybody to participate in that, because once you're clear about your mission, vision, even your values, and you can package them well. I'm a big believer also in packaging. And you can package them well, then people start remembering those words, and that's forms a good base to start with. So in our case at DBS, we have a mission we call Making Banking Joyful. It's the subtext of a longer mission. But you talk to anybody in the company, now they all know that the idea of making banking joyful is quixotic. I mean, most people think, how can banking be joyful?
Yes.
But it speaks to our people. And so that's the basic common culture. Everybody says if you can make banking joyful for the customer, that's a good thing. We set up a set of visions, not one, but at one stage our vision was to be the best bank in the world. We called it BBIW, hashtag BBIW, best bank in the world. We eventually evolved it to a new vision, which is best bank for a better world.
Oh.
These visions were created by our people. And the idea of being the best bank for a better world is now deeply rooted in the company. So everybody's thinking about not only what does it mean to be best, but what does it mean to create a better world? How do you create impact? Now, when your mission of making banking joyful and your vision of creating a better world are deeply rooted and embraced, that's already the foundations of creating a common culture, because the language is the same and the direction becomes the same for people. But we don't stop there. I'm a big believer in the McLuhan adage, which is the medium is the message. So packaging matters. And so most of the things that we try to focus people on, we try to package with short, sharp words and mnemonics. So very early, we wanted to create a service value culture. And we spent, again, a few days collectively as a team saying what should define our service value. We came up with respectful, easy to deal with, and dependable. And respectful, particularly in Asia, because you want to respect the guest. But the three words are actually quite clever, because this RED, they stand for red.
Oh. Yeah.
And therefore, red is a very powerful word, because you can tag it in the front of a lot of things: redistribute, redevelop, redeploy. They're all red. And so you build a language around red. And that language around red allows you to communicate simply to all the people across countries, across culture. Everybody understands red. And now you're no longer talking a language difference, you're talking about an emotive thing of what does red mean to you. And the minute you can equate red means a special kind of service value, everybody can buy into that. So how do you actually package in a way that you can get people to buy into the emotive content of what you want is the trick. Storytelling is important. So it's not just packaging through mnemonics, it's also packaging through the right kinds of stories. And telling stories, because stories people understand.
Yes.
And stories, again, are emotive. They speak to people's hearts. So a good way to form culture is to do that. It's not just sending emails out. It is actually focusing on doing some of these things. We use one more methodology. It's something called BEANS. BEANS stands for Behavior Enablers and Nudges, BEANS, right? Behavior Enablers and Nudges.
Yes.
We found a long time ago that if you want people to behave in a particular way, you got to prod them. This is the Daniel Kahneman, the nudge idea or the blink idea. And so one of the beans that we created, for example, is something called a MOJO. A MOJO is a ritual. Every time we have a meeting, the Mo stands for the meeting owner who calls the meeting. But the Jo is the important person. Every meeting we have a Jo. And the Jo is called a joyful observer, whose job it is to watch the meeting and critique the meeting. And they have the power to confiscate your phones if you're not working hard, if you're not paying attention. They have the power to stop the meeting because people aren't following what's going on. And at the end of the meeting, they give you criticism on how was the meeting conducted. Now, we found the very act of naming a Jo changes people's behavior. So under observation, people behave differently. And that creates a common way of how do you run meetings. And that transcends again into what is the culture that you create. So there are a lot of different techniques you can use to shaping culture by design, to shaping the culture that you want.
Wow, I like the term MOJO. Did you also have a Jo in your meetings? And
Yes.
what did the Joe do?
No, so that's how it started. In the very early meeting, I asked a young lady to be the Joe, and about halfway through the meeting, I got a little excited and lost my temper. And of course, when the CEO loses his temper, the meeting basically ground to a halt. Nobody would say anything.
Yeah.
So meeting got over. By then, I'd cooled off, and then I asked the Joe, saying, "Can you critique the meeting?" And she looked at me with a lot of hesitation and a career limiting move, she thought, and said, "This is the worst meeting I've ever attended, because after Piyush lost his temper, nothing happened. And we didn't get any outcomes after that." Now, I recognize she was right. And so I made her a hero. I said, "Yeah, that's exactly what I want." And it was not right. I shouldn't have lost my temper. But I'm really proud of this young girl to call me out. And once we did that, it became a okay thing in the company that if you can call out the CEO, then you can call out anybody. And so the Joe got a legitimate role in helping do these things.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for sharing. And I guess that really helps in further meetings as well.
It helps in meetings as well, but that's what I mean. That, at the end of the day, if you can come up with rituals like this, you can create a company culture. And I think if you do that, that's 80% of the battle of cross-cultural communication, because you drive commonality in a platform. But there's still the 20%. I mean, countries, people behave differently, their upbringing is different, etc. So I'm not saying disregard it. But I do think that getting 80% commonality is a fantastic thing to do.
And moving on and furthering on your sharing, when we have a common language that people speak, we build a common company culture, to what extent can we still have space for diversity? To what extent can we still have space for different people to bring their own experiences, cultural backgrounds, not just for diversity, but it also helps in innovation and it prevents groupthink, echo chamber. So how do you find the balance in that?
Yeah. I think one great prototype of that is actually Singapore. You think about what is the difference between Singapore and the US. In US, you try to create a melting pot where everybody coalesces to a common integrated culture. In Singapore, we want to create a Singapore identity, but at the same time, we take pride in the fact that we have multiple cultures and we encourage people to embrace their ethnic cultures and their own cultures. I do think that's actually quite important. To give people respect and recognize that they come from a particular place and a particular place in their heads and give them space to express that, I think it's actually a good thing. What you said is correct. You don't want echo chambers. You don't want everybody, sort of parroting the same kind of language all the time. And so you have to have space for that. So that's why I keep saying 80% is good. The 20%, you've got to cater for that. And in catering for that, training helps a lot. So we are very conscious about the kind of training we give our people. We train everybody on a basic diversity, inclusion, DEI kind of framework. We have a partner called Growth Smart, and we use that training approach. We have multiple modules around diversity by gender, diversity by age, how should you look at diversity by culture. So we do a bunch of training around that. We do a lot of training around something called unconscious bias. So we train our people on what to look for and how you might be expressing unconscious bias. So that's another very specific program that we run. We run a program called Respect at Work. In fact, that's a mandatory program. Everybody goes through that to figure, how do you actually drive a conscious degree of respect for people's opinion and respect for other points of view. When we move people across, I already talked to you about the Singapore immersion program. We do a specific immersion if people move from one country to another country to help them learn the nuances of the new host country and how to assimilate within it. We have things called lean-in circles and T-circles and T-sprints where we bring teams of people together, and it's almost cathartic. We get people to lean in and talk about themselves and what makes them different and what drives them, just so people get an appreciation for what are the different kinds of catalysts and motivators that people have. So we focus a lot on training people to appreciate differences and then to accept differences. And what you said is true. There's a lot of power in looking at some of these differences. It's even more true when you think not just of your employee base, but when you think of your customer base.
Yes, correct.
Long time ago in the early 90s, I used to have these constant arguments with my colleagues in the US. Their whole focus was you can cookie cutter all the products. And the example they used to cite to me was McDonald's. They said, McDonald's is the same. No matter which country you go, McDonald's is McDonald's. And I still remember I used to tell them at some stage McDonald's is going to have to rethink. Because you take McDonald's with his beef burgers into India, they won't sell a thing. Because, you don't eat beef.
Yes.
So if you're not willing to change to customize for the local requirement, you won't succeed. So that 20% customization for local requirements is, I think, still critical. So let me give you some interesting examples.
Yes, please.
We make internet websites and mobile websites and so on. And it is so interesting that if you look at the design and the design people, we have 150 design people who help us do the UX. When you design for most of the English-speaking places, Singapore, Hong Kong, people look for very simplistic and very clean designs. They want their face to be like Google, just one bar in the middle. But if you go to the more Chinese cultures, you go to mainland China, you go to Taiwan and so on, people love seeing a cluttered front page. They want to see lots of things happening on the page. It's a cultural difference. And if you cater for the wrong website to the wrong audience, you won't succeed.
You won't.
Right? So you need to understand that. Now, we started many years ago, we embraced Clay Christensen's idea of the true job to be done. So you got to look deep and say, what is the job to be done? And you got to look at the emotional job and the emotional behaviors of people. And so we embraced journey thinking at scale. We taught all our people to think outside in, to observe carefully. And to help with that observation, we started hiring anthropologists and ethnographers. Can you imagine banks hiring people from anthropology and ethnography? But we did that to teach our people to observe the customer. Even through COVID, when you could not get physical customers to observe, everybody was on WebEx, and we figured technically a way that we'd have two WebEx rooms, or a WebEx room and a Teams room. We'd have the customers in one room, and our observers would be in the other room. And they'd be watching to see what the customers were doing and how they were behaving. Because understanding deeply what customers do and why, and getting the insight of why they behave in a particular way is essential if you're going to customize, if you're going to innovate at the coalface. So our whole innovation agenda, we therefore do both top-down and bottoms-up. We do take some big bets top-down, which are the big innovation ideas which we think will pretty much be consistent. But we also do a large part of our innovation bottoms-up. We give the power to our employees or to people in the actual journeys of the coalface because they know what tweak is going to work in the local circumstance and the local market. And it won't always be the same.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think that's really wonderful because customers are also important. And like what you mentioned is how can we customize to each of the different preferences as well, but at the same time still maintaining our brand and the commonality that we have. Wow, thank you so much. It's really a great sharing. I think we just want to hear as well any advice for young leaders. And this is probably the question that we're going to wrap up with. Any advice for young leaders who are navigating in the space of cross-cultural environment?
I think there is no replacement for experience and exposure. So like I said, you can read about cultures, you can go and do an online course on what to be careful of and what words to use. But at the end of the day, the best way to understand cultures is to interface with the people. And so you need the exposure to the people, you need the exposure to the environment. And therefore, my first advice to people is travel. Go out, kick the tires, travel. And if you can't travel, then make sure where you are, you try and get a very broad cosmopolitan group of friends. So you can understand and engage and work with people. I think it's very important. The second thing I'd say adjunct to that is give it a lot of attention and importance. Because when people talk about EQ, emotional quotient, right? What is EQ? EQ is all about this. understanding the subtle nuances of why people behave differently,
Yes.
what causes them to react in particular ways. And sometimes it is to do with the person, but oftentimes it is to do with where they're coming from. So be sensitive to that, because if your EQ is good, then that actually complements your IQ and makes you a lot more successful.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. And when you say travel, does it just mean holidays, or I'm sure you're referring to more than that as well?
I'm actually, whatever you can do. If you can, if you're in uni or college, I tell people, go and do a term abroad. If you're working in a company, I say, put your hand up and try and get on a task force or try and get on a project that takes you to other countries. If you can't do that, just go and travel and, go on holidays and then interact with people on the ground. So whatever you can do, but the best way to understand and embrace cultural diversity is by experiencing it.
And that's really helpful, because I was in SMU previously, and studying there, they had a lot of focus and emphasis on global exposure as well. And many of the students really had international experiences, which really thankful for your efforts and service to the community and wherever we are when we live. So thank you so much, Piyush, for joining us on the show. We really appreciate your thoughts, your sharings, and your efforts. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Alistair. I enjoyed the conversation.
And that's right, you heard it from Piyush in terms of cross-cultural communication, and I hope that many of us learn something from today. And remember, continue to have that global exposure, because it will help to continue to build us up to understand one another better. That's all for now. My name is Alistair. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again soon.